for her to answer it. Okay, so the second speaker for today is Marianna Kokolaki. She is a PhD student at Paris-Saclay University. I apologize in advance for my pronunciation in French. And she works under the supervision of Dr. Virginie van Bazenhof in the Cognition and Brain Dynamics team, particularly in the Cognitive Neuroimaging unit. She is interested in how the brain encodes temporal information that are stored and can later be retrieved from the memory. She's also interested in the link between the duration or the felt speed of time and the segmentation of everyday experiences. She holds 2 master's degrees. The first is in Fundamental and Applied Cognitive Sciences from the University of Lyon, and the second is in Integrative Biology and Physiology from the Sorbonne University. Her bachelor degree is in biology from the University of Crete. Today, Marianna is going to talk about the distinctive features of experiential time, focusing on duration, speed, and event density. So, as Marianna said, she's happy to take questions at any point. So if something is unclear, please disrupt her. Marianna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Let me share. So can you see my screen okay?
Yes, it's full screen.
Okay.
So
okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk to you about, well, as I feel already described, the distinctive feature of experiential time focuses on duration, speed, and event density. I'm happy to say that the data that I'm going to present today are published as of last month. So I'd like from the beginning to introduce and say thank you to the key players in this project other than me. So namely Ivan, who was with the project from the beginning and its conception. Then Simon, who without him, we wouldn't really have any stimuli to run any task. And of course, Virginie, who was my supervisor and still is my supervisor. And so I'm going to make an introduction that might be a bit redundant because we're all time people here, but humans, as we all know, can keep track of time intervals, like duration perception. They can feel the time passes, that we call passage of time, and assess the speed with which it seems to pass. And I'm going to focus a bit on the passage of time, mostly because it's not that much explored, so not everyone has the same intuition about it. So a passage of time judgment is defined as a judgment of how fast or slowly time seems to pass relative to normal, which might or may not make sense, but to be clear, this is a description of this experience that we have a very common experience when we feel like time not only passes, but sometimes it passes faster or slower than it's supposed to. So this can be reflected in when we're in the waiting room, for example, when we feel like time really drags, or on the contrary, when we're having fun, time seems to fly. But what exactly is the passage of time? Well, there have been research in recent years that show that these judgments of the passage of time are affected a lot by our emotional state, by the attention that we pay to the task, but also by the task difficulty. And they are also modulated a lot by temporal expectations that we have and can be violated. A key question, though, that I'm going to talk about is how it is linked with duration perception, because we already know that in depressive patients, for example, they report a slower flow of time, a slower passage of time that they experience, but their ability to judge intervals, the duration of intervals, remains unaffected. It has been suggested then later that these two measurements, temporal measurements, are distinct and are mediated by distinct mechanisms in the brain, but they are not completely unrelated, since short durations seem to pass faster and long durations seem to pass slower. So what it is really the speed of passage of time. And I'm going to stop here and say, because I'm going to do it a lot, that every time that I say speed in this presentation, it has nothing to do with actual speed, but we're talking about speed of time. So I'm sorry if everyone seeing the title thought something different. So what is the speed of passage of time? Well, it has been suggested before that this flow of time that we perceive could be a perceptual illusion. But what does it mean, a perceptual illusion? Where it's the same idea as, well, in a movie, like we saw before, when we have distinct frames but we perceive it as a continuous movement. It has been suggested that the flow of time can be the continuous change in perceptual content. So we change a bit of narrative. We no longer talk about time, but we see the flow of time as a flow of events. And more recently, it has been proposed that the judgment of passage of time could be a description of the most salient external or internal contextual change experienced. So I'm going to go to one specific study that really explored this idea of passage of time as changes using a star field, a star field, meaning that the star field. So there are colored dots in a screen that have a specific velocity and they move in a specific direction. And in this specific study, Jordan and collaborators had this star field with 3 different durations. And they asked, among other things, how long in seconds was the waiting time while the star field was on the screen, and how fast did the time pass. We notice here that for passage of time, as it normally is being measured by the use of a Likert scale or a visual analog scale. And they also asked how fast the stars move, because there were different velocities, a high and low velocity, and how many stars were visible. So based on the low and high density of stars. And what we see in the results is very interesting, where first of all, they replicate this, that we already knew, that this dependence on the passage of time rating on the duration. So longer durations had slower passage of time ratings compared to shorter durations. But they also saw that both velocity and the density of the stars, when they're high, they lead a faster experience of passage of time. So this, I'm going to go back to this idea of change, and it's how it is not surprising that it affects, in general, temporal judgments. And I'm not going to stay a long time in this because Lydia already described it actually in the previous presentation. But it has been suggesting that remembered durations at least are mediated by the amount of change in context in a given interval, or by the number of events or segments into which this interval is divided. So the more changes, the longer the duration, so the more we overestimate the duration. And as we saw in the previous study, the higher event density, so the more stars in that case, the faster the passage of time is perceived to be. However, as again, Lydia really showed very well in her previous presentation, change is a bit too simplistic for everyday experience. And there is a whole field of study called event segmentation theories that really works and study how exactly this continuous experience our brain can perceive and segment it into distinct events, distinct episodes. And we define an event in that case as a segment of time at a given location that is perceived to have a beginning and an end. And this can be more high level than a single change, and so more complicated. And it can also influence our perception of duration, at least, because we know from studies before that the more segments or boundaries during an interval as defined by event segmentation theories, the longer the memory for duration, and also that during navigation, the more turns that are normally associated with a boundary, the longer the perceived duration of the itinerary. So in our project, we wanted to ask some very specific questions. Well, first of all, since the judgment of the speed of time scale with objective duration, can we use a psychometric model for their assessment? We wanted to ask this to escape this idea of a Likert scale or a visual analog scale and use a psychometric tool like we use for duration for speed of time as well. The second question was, what is the effect of everyday high-level events, in this case, and not simple changes on both duration and speed judgments? And finally, how are the two measurements relate? Because this is the interesting part. Can we test both of them on the same participants in the same set of stimuli and compare them? So before I move on to the task, I'm going to give you some context on the project and why we did the choices that we did. Well, first of all, this project was part of the Wild Times project, which is funded by the Agence Nationale de la Recherche in France. And it was a collaboration between our team and a team in the Université Gustave Eiffel. At the time, it was IFSTAR, and the French railway company, SNCF. So the point of this project was to use a combination of a real train travel, as we see here, with experiments both on a waiting room in a train station, but also in the trains, lab experiments and virtual reality, to develop paradigms for studying time, but also space in real-time transportation, to have like a comparison between the wild, so real life, compared to the lab and compared to VR environments. And finally, to try and explore duration, distance, but passage of time as well in terms of behavior and neuroimaging. And why I'm saying that is because that was the context for my project as well. But it also happened during the COVID pandemic. So these were the two main things that also drive a lot how we made our choices. And for this reason, we used the context of a train station and with a virtual environment. And it was an experiment that happened online. So the stimuli for our experiment were videos, as I said, of a virtual train station. The environment was developed by Simon, and we had different types of stimuli where we manipulated the type, the number, and the duration of the events that were happening. So the events could either be a train event in half of the videos, or a human event, so human actions that would normally take place in the train station. And we had some videos with 3 events and some with 7 events. And the videos have varying duration from 17 to 23 seconds. So this is an example of a stimulus design. For example, you could have a video of 20 seconds where a man is walking at first, then there is a train that passes by, and then there is a woman that's pacing on the phone. And I'm going to show you a video example as well. Here's a man. Behind, we have normal sounds that would take place at the train station. The train is passing by. And then another person appears and walking by. So this was an example of a video of 17 seconds, if I'm not mistaken. So the task was a bisection task. For those that are not familiar, the participants in their own browser, they could see one video at a time. And they were randomly assigned to one of 2 conditions, either a duration bisection or a speed bisection. So in the duration bisection, after each video, they pressed a button according to whether they felt that this was a short or a long video in duration. And in the speed bisection, they reported whether the video was fast or slow in terms of passage of time. And from this, we could feed psychometric curves to the data. So for each individual participant and each condition, we fitted a curve like this. And for those that are unfamiliar, here we have the proportion of long responses the participant pressed as a function of the duration of the stimuli. And this model gives us an idea. So we can extract parameters from the model that gives us an idea about the participants' biases, for example, or in general, their behavior. So the one that I'm going to use a lot in this presentation is the point of subjective equality, which is defined as the stimulus level at which there is an equal probability for responding both choices. So this is the 50% threshold, this point right here. And if this is shifted towards the right, then we have a bias towards short durations. Participants are pressing short more often. If it's shifted towards the left, we have a bias towards long durations. So the first thing that we assessed was whether we can use second scale videos for a duration bisection task to plot, to fit a psychometric curve. And we were very happy that we could do that, because normally the durations used are way shorter for these types of tasks. And the second thing that we assessed, that we can do that for the speed of the passage of time as well. So you can see here we have the proportion of slow responses instead of long as a function of video duration again. But this time, the PAC here, the 50% threshold, will show a bias towards slow or fast, depending on where the curve is shifted. So you need to imagine that we had 4 curves like that for each participant. So we can compare between conditions according to the number and the type of events to make the inferences that we might want it to make. So why can we do this? Well, because as I said before, it has been shown before, and we replicated that the speed of passage of time judgments scale with the elapsed time of the video. So allowing the use of this type of bisection task and allowing us to fit a psychometric curve to the data. So every time, okay. So here I'm going to report mostly points of subjective equality that really reflect this shift in the curves that I described before. So with dark blue, we had a high number of events, and with light blue, a low number of events for the duration. And with dark and light colors is the equivalent for green for passage of time. These two curves are just for illustration purposes, because I just took the mean across participants and plotted it, which is not obviously something that we can quantify here. But it shows really this shift that we can also see here, that as the PEC increases, then we have a bias towards shorter durations and vice versa. And the first thing that we report is that more events lead to longer duration estimates, as we expected from the literature, and quicker speed judgment in accordance to the Jordan study that I presented before. And now another thing that we did was that every time a participant finished the task, we asked, do you want to participate to the equivalent task? So if they did a duration bisection, we asked, how about you now do a different task, but for passage of time? So we had 62 participants that agreed to do both tasks, allowing us for within participant exploration and allowing us to compare the two judgments directly. So we had the same participants that did the same the two different temporal judgments on the same set of stimuli. So the question we wanted to ask first was, are speed judgments and duration judgment descriptions of the same phenomenon? So if that was the case, then speed patterns would follow duration estimates. As we saw before, the longer the duration, the slower we tend to judge the speed of time. However, what we saw here is not exactly that, because when we add more events to a stimulus, then we tend to overestimate the duration, but perceive a faster passage of time. So speed judgments are really not duration judgment, as it has been shown before in the literature. So then we asked another question: what if intuitively speed, analogous to actual speed, reflects the rate of events per unit of time? So one would say that we first make an estimation of the duration of an interval, then the brain counts the number of events within it, and then it uses these two estimations to form a passage of time judgment. So then we expect, first of all, that this shifting the curve would be inversely analogous for duration and passage of time. And we do find a correlation like that, even though it's not very small, it's very small, it's still significant. However, when we compared the reaction times between the passage of time judgment and the duration judgment, what we see is that participants, the same participants, were consistently faster when responding for passage of time, which means basically that speed judgments cannot really require duration judgment since they happen faster. So then we were wondering, what if then instead of relying on accurate estimates of duration, the speed of time can be influenced by the overall complexity of the scene. So this would be in line of with event segmentation theories. So as we segment the scene in distinct episodes. This is really what is influencing this idea of a flow of time. And what we did was we went back to the raw data. So we're no longer reporting PSEs here. So here we have the percentage of long responses for duration and slow for passage of time as a function this time of the density, the event density of each stimulus. So what we did was that we took the number of events that we control, so 3 and 7, as if divided by the seconds of each stimulus, so the duration of each stimulus. And here in different colors, we have the duration, the actual duration of the stimulus. And what we see for duration is to be expected. We do see this shift towards longer responses the more the event density increases, but we see a strong dependency, obviously, in objective duration. What we see for passage of time is not that, though. It's a bit different. We see that there is an almost linear relationship with event density. So this rescaling back to the original time doesn't really happen for passage of time. But my assumption would be that if we actually control for the density of events of each stimulus and not the duration and a specific number of events, then this relationship will be completely linear. So to conclude, we first used a bisection task to assess a second scale duration estimation, and we extended it to the passage of time judgments. Then we replicated the well-known dependency of temporal measurements, both of them, on events or the segments in the scene. Then we strengthened this idea that speed of the passage of time and duration judgments are distinct psychological phenomena. They don't seem to rely on each other. But we do challenge the intuition that speed judgments derive from duration estimations. And what we suggest is that maybe duration estimation derives from speed estimation instead, and that the two are computationally linked through the rate of change. So I think I forgot to put a reference here, but we're not the first to suggest that, as there is a paper by Issa and collaborators that actually suggests the same thing, that we have an intuition of how much time has elapsed based on this idea we have of the flow of integration of the flow of time. So a limitation of our study, so we can't really claim this suggestion, is that maybe both duration and speed estimates could result from a common dependency on objective duration and in reality have nothing to do mechanistically with each other. And well, that's all. A thank you to the Cognition and Brain Dynamics team and the Wild Times people from the Wild Times project, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Marianna, for your presentation. This is a really exciting project, actually. Let's see if we have any questions in the audience for you. I can see clapping hands so far. So my question is on that. Do you have any thoughts on how to follow up on this conclusion that you have based on how we calculate speed, let's say, and how this affects our temporal judgments, maybe with a different temporal task, to also capture how the density of the events are retrieved from our memory? So maybe using a reproduction task.
I mean, well, the first thing that I would do, to be honest, was to replicate this in the lab so that we can see if this the reaction time effect, we can actually see it, because this was an online task. So that would be the first thing to do. And then I would really try with a bisection or a 2AFC again, but this time, instead of varying duration, I would really vary event density as a measure to see if I can have anything like that. But in a reproduction task, I don't know how I would extend it to passage of time, to be honest.
Yeah, it wouldn't extend definitely to passage of time, so you could not compare both to my understanding, but it would be interesting how the density of events would be illustrated in someone's memory. Or when you say to transfer that in the lab, I saw that you developed a protocol for VR. So are you thinking to do that maybe on a VR environment and then compare it as well to a computer version, similar to as you did in the online version? Because we know that in VR environments you have the immersion as well, so this might also affect the duration of speed and.
I mean, that would be cool. And I would also like to see a scene where the event segmentation is way more controlled than what we did. However, I mean, my current project is a bit further away from that because I started this as a master's student, and now I'm working more with memory and more lower level stimuli. So, well, if someone wants to do something after that, I'll be my guest. But
Yeah, okay, because it's super cool that you managed to differentiate these functions, let's say, of speed and temporal judgments. Okay, so a last call for questions to Marianna. I think it was super clear to everybody. I will follow up your work, and well, I guess I will see you next month again at the end of April. We have a senior speaker coming. And I would like to thank everybody for participating, and mostly our speakers that spend the time to be here with us today. So thank you, Lydia and Marianna, for sharing your work. The recording will be shortly uploaded to our YouTube channel, so you can watch it in your own time as well and share it with your colleagues. Thank you again for joining. Okay, so let's stop the recording now. Where is it? Yeah.